This is an RNZ podcast.
21 to 9, and on a Wednesday we call that Midweek Media Watch O'Clock. I'm joined now from our studio in Wellington by Mr. Midweek Media Watch himself, Colin Peacock. Hello, Colin.
G'day. Do you want me to blurt out the answer? Because I think I know it.
Do you think you know it? No,
Yeah,
no.
I'm certain
You
I do.
shouldn't blurt out the answer.
Okay.
All right, thank you. I know it's taking every ounce of your restraint as well. Yeah.
No one likes a smart ass. That's fine.
Let me compliment you first of all on what I thought was an excellent episode of Media Watch on Sunday over the weekend. I really enjoyed the segment that you did with Tim Murphy about the ongoing TVNZ Tallies court defamation case, and I thought Tim's reporting on this has been exemplary. So I really enjoyed that, Colin. Well done.
Oh, that was just an absolute gift because he attended so much of it and summed it up so well.
Fantastic, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely terrific. All right, let's jump into some media news of the past 7 days. Two big storm systems in the past 7 days, and these big weather events, they are a lot for the media to handle.
They are, yeah. And I think all the things in the news that divide people, capital gains tax and Trump and all this, why don't we talk about something that just pisses everybody off, the weather, because it's been so bad. But it takes me back because I think I did my first work experience in the Christchurch Press.
Really?
Yeah, but when there was a very, very heavy snowstorm, this was in the mid-1990s or something, and that was before the internet had really taken off at all. So that thing of the news being the huge appetite for it, but it being so much harder to get when roads are impassable, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I am always interested in and how, and also the way that when it tips over from sort of novelty event to really serious, when the reporter out having their hair blown around and being stood on a hilltop for kind of comic effect, and when it goes past that, it all gets much more serious. But the thing that made me think about this was a listener, Reese Goff, got in touch to say he thought TVNZ's One News did a great job. Lots of people on the ground down south, Southland, Otago, lots of footage. And then he compared it to the 3 News Bulletin, which he was aware is, not resourced as such, now that it's done by Stuff on a much smaller budget. He said, it really makes a difference when you don't see the warm bodies in the ground, they're using social media footage and stuff like that. But he made a good point where he said, they don't make use of the largest newsroom in the country, in quotes, and that is something Stuff itself, when they took over that 3 News Bulletin, said was a great resource. They do have the biggest and the only really truly national news gathering operation in the country, apart from RNZ, but much bigger than RNZ. And they didn't and haven't made use much of their newsrooms in the Southland Times and other places in Invercargill, which would have really been useful for this report. So it is a puzzle, and it puzzles some listeners. But by and large, I do really agree with Reese that TVNZ in particular, with a fully resourced 6 p.m. bulletin, it really does do come into its own for stories like this. Also, I think Breakfast, I don't think was on air on Labor Day Monday, but TV on Tuesday, they were back. They had reporters there, Clutha local officials live on camera, and so it was great. And also, having said that, also the Southland Times, having said they didn't play a part much in Stuff's news bulletin, unless I missed it.
Well, you were talking about the TV bulletin, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But the Southland Times paper, editor Shay Baker, Louisa Stale, reporter, they did great work too.
How about radio? How did radio handle it?
Yeah, and well, it did well. Lots of good stuff on RNZ in particular. And of course, RNZ is obliged to cover emergencies under the legislation. They did special information bulletins for the Southland and Clutha regions from about, I think, 5 p.m. on Friday. And we have Charlotte Cook, recently appointed to this role of field correspondent. She's still the midday report presenter, of course, but she was down in Clyde on Tuesday morning and posted a lovely package for Morning Report.
The house is warm, only because of a log fire, while the gentle hum of the generator allows for a hot cuppa. Otherwise, like most of the area, there's no power. We jump in the truck, and it doesn't take long to work out why.
So this is where we've lost our power. That's our last power pole. So you can see it snapped off there.
And that goes nowhere now.
Yeah, it goes to a transformer that was there. 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1
Yeah,
That's great.
really nice piece. Yeah. And there was a lovely
Audio
video.
rich, yeah.
Well, not just audio though, because they
Evocative,
had Kelvin Samuel was there as well.
That's right.
With his video skills. So the video with that very scene. The story, I read it first on the ODT that Charlotte wrote as well. So, the sharing that RNZ does, plays a role. So, yeah, really, really good. Also, a shout out, Logan Savoury from the, ex of the Southland Times with his Southland Tribune on Substack, still covering all of that as well as the sport and other stuff he covers from the region. It is an extraordinary effort. I think he's been doing it for about 2 years now. And, yeah, it's remarkable. And he had great coverage of the cleanup. So yeah, lots of good coverage, and if you you can get it from a range of sources, I think you get a really good picture of it. And there's a guy who's a radio kind of wizard, James Cridland. He's based in I think they had big storms in Brisbane about the same time, and he wrote about how his ABC stations were coming in and out of local coverage. It was very frustrating and so on. So it really makes a difference, I think, to people when they get what they expect from their live news outlets, but also that kind of wrap-up coverage, clean-up coverage, when it's done really well, as it has been by reporters in Southland and by Charlotte Cook and others.
Do you think it's hard for editors to judge the national appetite for stories about damage that are kind of local? Well, they are kind of localised. I guess these weather events were pretty crazy. They a lot of the country was affected in different ways. There was this wind, there was rain, there were fires burning as well. But at the same time, editors have to make calls as to what to prioritise. Yeah,
that's it. I mean, and also the fact that it's gone on for a full week. Yes, when you think about it, we were here in Wellington getting howling wind and rain and thinking, what? Fires in Canterbury? Like, it just seems strange, but that was how odd it was. But that, I think, amplified the whole story for those who were interested. It made it really interesting. I think it is tough. News Talk ZB, out of interest, on their news programs didn't do very much, of the sort of morning after stuff, after the last week, the Thursday, Friday stuff, and then again the early part of this week, Monday, back after Labour Day. Not very much at all. They had it in their news bulletins, but decided sort of not to do that around the country stuff, which I think is a bit of a surprise. But maybe they've made that calculation. They're a commercial network, and maybe they do think that actually people don't have, if they've been watching it while it's going on, maybe they don't want to hear that stuff. But I also thought Bernard Hickey made another good point on his outlet, the Kaka. He was saying, no mention in any reports of the extreme weather from any officials saying anything that they're surprised about extreme weather events getting more extreme and frequent because of climate change. Also, you can understand why that is. When people's carpets are wet and there's a tree in the lounge and stuff, they don't want to hear this debate about, is the climate causing more extreme weather, and is what we've seen a result of climate change? Do we need to mitigate emissions, etc.? That would feel like a debate for another time for people in that moment. But he made an interesting point, saying few signs that dairy farmers, cell tower operators, power line companies and councils are preparing for this change by investing much at all in resilience measures, solar panels, battery installations to operate off-grid, and pointing out that all these things were in the reports into Gabrielle and stuff like that. And an interesting row, like this is tangential, I suppose, to this, but last week the government changed things to make, changed the law basically so that the climate disclosure rules for listed companies no longer exist. And that was debated on the ZB Drive show on their section, The Huddle. And TVNZ's Jack Tame was trying to make a sort of similar point about this. It's not necessarily related to the storms that came later, but Jack did relate it to what was going on Thursday and Friday, the heavy winds and the fires down south. And he was kind of shouted down by the host, Heather Duplessis-Allen, and the other guest, Jordan Williams of the Taxpayers Union, for connecting the two issues. So this goes on for about a minute, but bear with me because I think it's an interesting exchange.
10 minutes ago, I was looking on my screen of a person literally being blown into busy traffic in Wellington. Like, we've had crazy weather.
But I mean, well, you think it's windy in Wellington?
Dude, that happened to my dad in the 70s.
The frequency.
Jack, I need to sit down and talk to you about weather.
The frequency with which we see extreme weather events is obviously increasing.
This is the sort of negativity we talk ourselves into.
What's happening to migrant flows from Africa at the moment, Jordan? What's that being driven by? Because last I checked, Europe is being overrun by migrants, many of whom are being pushed out by a warmer climate because their crops don't grow.
The issues of immigration in Europe and our climate.
They're being pushed into Europe. Yeah, absolutely. The two things are linked. If you think Europe faces a challenge now with some of the authoritarian leadership, try again in 50 years when you have millions more people coming from one of the most densely populated parts of the world, desperately trying to find themselves in the cooler climate so they can actually have prosperity in their lives.
More people die of cold than warm.
Oh, that was interesting. Fiery. I like that.
Well, it was interesting. And they brought it to a halt there because I think they had other topics they wanted to cover. And the host, Heather Duplessis-Allen, was aware that, this was going to take off another direction. But weirdly, like pure coincidence, but today, that same slot, same program, Jack Tame was a guest again on the show with Maurice Williamson was the other guest, and they were talking about Bill Gates, his because he said today people are getting too nihilistic, too pessimistic about climate change and talking themselves into a corner, almost echoing some of the things maybe Jordan Williams was saying there. And they had another debate about this where Jack Tame tried to argue a contrary point of view. It didn't go down. It was seen as somehow being sort of unrealistic, although that was almost the sort of point that Bill Gates himself, who has invested a lot in climate change initiatives and mitigation and so on, was trying to make. So yeah, it's interesting that in these times, even in these times when we've had the storms, and it is something to think about. And there's the Jamaica hurricane going on at the moment. That people don't tend to want to discuss that issue in much depth.
Let's talk a bit of sport and the Taurua affair. Nolene Gate is over, Colin.
Yeah, well, that's weird. I mean, we've got the Constellation Cup going on right now, I think. We're probably in the third or maybe even the fourth quarter of that game. But yeah, if I was Jamie Wall or something in the writing column, I'd be saying like, that's the Constellation Cup, but this whole affair is like, Netball New Zealand wins the Constipation Cup because this whole affair has been so incredibly uptight. It is so strange that to the media's like intense frustration that months and months of this issue going on. Nolene Taurua will be restored to the role, I think, at the end of the year. But we still don't know exactly what it was she did and how many players were upset or exactly why. And this has gone on for ages. So just one example, this is back in September. And this is the chair of Netball New Zealand, Matt Winneray, not answering a very blunt question from Guy Havelt on Sport Nation.
If it's not player power, what are the high performance issues then?
Look, I'm not going to go into the conversation, into those discussions. You guys are all familiar with the Privacy Act, so that's what we can say there. We are continuing to focus on that high performance environment and getting that to be as good as it can be.
The Privacy Act.
Yeah. I don't think the Privacy Act is meant to work in that way. I mean, I understand that, if you start commenting as an employer or a sports body like that on something that involves employees and, your players, your contracted players, you could jeopardise employment relationships. Something might be revealed that shouldn't be, but I don't think it's a legal issue really. But fast forward to Tuesday, yesterday, Ryan Bridge on the Herald Now show, again interviewing Matt Winneray and again trying to find out something about exactly what has caused the problems at Netball New Zealand. But again, completely fruitless.
Because it's bizarre where the country has been having a debate based on nothing because you haven't said anything. What is your message to other coaches in the sport right now? Where is the line? What is the bar? If you raise your voice when you're yelling an instruction at a player on the court, is that okay?
Ryan, it's not going to be useful for me to get into hypotheticals. I don't think, I think you create a straw man you can tip over, that's fine. But what I would say is there is a heightened awareness of the challenges in high performance environments.
That's very unsatisfying.
No, but I quite like that response though. Look, create your straw man, tip it over if you want. I quite like that. That was quite good pushback. But this environment they talk, we just don't know what it is. It's such a vague concept, isn't it? What is this environment? Is it some sort of surface full of broken furniture now and broken glass after all the rowing that's gone on for months, or is it?
Do you think
we just don't know?
Do you think the absence of any kind of information has actually led to almost like a Streisand effect kind of thing? No, nothing to see here, trust us, and sort of the public maybe being saying, what do you mean nothing to see here? We can't see anything.
It depends. That thing of if she takes her job on, and maybe if we fast forward, if they're playing the long game, this point next year, no one remembers as long as things are going well. Who knows? But it's just remarkable. Do you think if there was like a British type tabloid sports culture or journalism culture, we would know all of that? I mean, money might be changing hands, which wouldn't be a good thing necessarily, but someone would winkle out what it is had happened for sure, and they would have to account for it. But just makes me think. The Labour Party, under all this questioning now about is their policy being leaked and so on. I mean, they would be looking at Netball New Zealand and thinking, how have they kept a lid on this? I think someone should set up a consultancy. Whoever's driving this, it's just extraordinary that we actually don't know the details. Which is, it felt a little slightly desperate of Ryan Bridge there, saying, was it shouting? Was it swearing? And he's Matt Winneray just not having it. Very interesting.
All right, let's talk about this. Is a very interesting issue regarding media ethics and the use of technology. RNZ's new podcast, Nark, out today, which centres on an effort to clear the name of a dead man convicted of murder. And Ross Applegrin's the man's name, and Ross's voice is rendered in AI.
So this is Nark. Mike Wesley-Smith. Mike has done this sort of thing before. Miscarriages of justice, things that have gone all the way through the court. So Tim Watkin, who's the head of podcasts and series, the executive editor here at RNZ, said Ross Applegrin, who died in 2013, had given interviews. He'd signed affidavits, written his own memoirs saying he did not kill Darcy Tahira, this prisoner who Ross Applegrin was convicted of killing. There's a lot of evidence, but nothing in audio. But AI now has the ability to clone voices. That's advanced significantly to the point where they thought they could try and use recordings of his voice from his interviews and use an AI voice generator to do it. Here is Mike Wesley-Smith himself in podcast episode 1 explaining what they did.
With the blessing and consent of his family, I used Radio Pacific interviews Ross had done to teach AI his voice patterns and then applied that to his own words.
I was aware Tahira was in for a bashing because the word was that he had done a rip-off and he was going to get a bashing, but nothing more than that.
It's fair to say, at the start, it was a bit hit and miss. That Kiwi accent took some finessing to nail. But in the end, it got there. A dead man's words just the way he'd say them. Or as good as.
Yeah, so then Tim Watkin asked the question. He's written an article about this that you can read on rnz.co.nz.
It's interesting.
Yeah, so he says, look, if one of journalism's purposes is to give voice to the voiceless, so what if that person has died? Should we let Applegrin speak for himself because we've got the technology? So the process was RNZ has an AI working group. They debated this request and approved it, but with these conditions that they needed consent from effectively his estate, Ross Applegrin's estate. They approved in writing. The voice had to be convincing enough to those who knew him, which is a good test. And Julie, his partner, said, yes, that sounds just like him. So not like the bit you heard there in the clip, which was the earlier iteration of the tech. Yeah. So, and they said, thirdly, we can only have him saying things that he actually wrote or said during his lifetime, nothing that could be imagined. And that's, obviously critical. And so that is the principle they stuck to.
What do you think about that decision?
Well, and there's a couple of ways you could see it. My mind went back to an interview I did earlier this year with the BBC AI chief, and they had a documentary, I think we talked about it, about Alcoholics Anonymous, where they actually they put an AI face on someone because the AA sort of kaupapa you've got to be anonymous. And the woman had said, look, it's my story. My face doesn't matter, nor my name. So I'm fine. Whereas I was thinking that would change the way viewers respond. And I was thinking maybe it's the same with voices. But in this instance, what they are doing in the end is just using a machine playing a role. So similar to having a voiceover actor, not a creator in itself. So I think that is the right side of the line. The one reservation I had might be that if it was me, if I had written things and later after my death they were voiced up, would I have written them in the way that I wanted them to be heard? I don't know. But in this case, where he's writing about quite stark things like not causing the death of someone, where the words and the meaning is pretty clear and the motivation behind it, that probably means that's a bit of a sort of sideline objection. I think in the end it's possible. But we hear of other instances. I think the relatives of Robin Williams, the actor who took his own life, his family are objecting to people using it for sort of artistic effect to voice up his writings and other people's sayings, even to make them more profound. That seems very dodgy.
It does does it feel a bit creepy? But maybe that's just because it's not, because it's new. Maybe that's just because it's new. Maybe this is because, with podcasts, as Tim Watkin pointed out in that piece, normally you just voice it up with an actor or someone from staff, and that would be that.
Yeah, it makes me think of just sort of ordinary sort of privacy things. Stephen Price, the barrister and media academic and former Media Watch contributor, he used to say about privacy, people's attitudes is weird. They just find it icky. They want to know things and they can see the public interest where, there's some shocking thing that could only be revealed by breaching someone's privacy, but they still find it icky. Over time, with social media, people sharing more than they ever would have imagined a news organisation would share about them, people kind of get over it and the kind of social attitude moves. So we'll see if it's the same with AI.
And we have the technology. Yeah, really interesting challenges ahead. Colin Peacock, thank you very much. We'll catch you next week.
Thank you. I'll be back.
It is Colin Peacock, and Media Watch will air on Sunday morning here on RNZ National.